Hi, it's Dr. Steve from Misericordia University. Welcome to this topic entitled Improving Lecture. This is part of the course TED 369, Curriculum and Methods in Secondary Education. There are various types of instructional approaches in which a teacher can use. The first is direct instructional approaches. These are approaches that involve the teacher directly leading students through instruction, such as lecture. There are inductive approaches, and these involve some kind of exploratory activity. So the teacher is not directly leading the students as much as leading the students to discover the content. There are social approaches in which students are working together in the process of learning. And there are also independent approaches in which students are independently pursuing their way through content. You can break down the different instructional approaches into two broad categories. Direct instruction, in which the teacher is really at the center of instruction, and the teacher leads the students through instruction and paces instruction. And the second type is indirect instruction, where the teacher is more of a facilitator who is leading the students through constructing knowledge. In this video, let's consider one type of direct instruction, which is really the primary type. That's lecture, also known as teacher talk. With lecturing, the teacher is the primary communicator of knowledge, meaning that the teacher is really dominating that scene at that point. The teacher manages the pace of the instruction. The teacher manages the sequence of instruction. The teacher is really in charge of everything that's happening and controls it. Duplass, one of the gurus, so to speak, of secondary education teaching methods, states that if you're a new teacher going out and you're going to plan to just rely on lecturing and having students take notes, you're not really going to be speaking to the students of today. In some cases, teachers, especially new teachers, may try to, so to speak, teach at the students through lecture. But that type of lecture does not ensure that students are really learning and acquiring that content. Teachers have to ensure that they monitor that students are learning the content, and also that they're monitoring to ensure they're not talking too long and not engaging students sufficiently in the learning activity. We also find that lecture is changing. Traditional lecture is being replaced by micro-lecture, and coupled with increased student interaction and hands-on activities. In his book on secondary education methods of teaching, Duplass suggests a series of alternate approaches to just traditional old-fashioned lecture. I've listed those different approaches here on this screen. As part of our course, I will be sharing in the Blackboard system a description of each of these so you can get a better idea of how you could possibly incorporate these different types of lecture into your classroom to improve the lecture. Each of these types of lecture involve somehow pausing, allowing students time to think, to engage more with the material, and even to interact with each other and possibly report back out to the class. Again, as part of our class, you'll learn more about this through a handout and through some activities. Our first interactive activity for this topic will be to explore and examine one of the methods of lecture. Now, if you're taking this class in person, face-to-face, we may be doing this in class. If you're taking this online, watch Blackboard or email for instructions from the instructor as to how we're going to conduct this activity. So how can a teacher improve his or her lectures? Let's look at a series of different ideas that may cause you to think about your style of speaking in front of a class. Think about conducting lectures more as discussions, or at least involving students more interactively throughout the lecture. Think about integrating some of those different types of lectures that we mentioned from Duplass and organize how you lecture differently. Think about integrating more visuals and more hands-on manipulatives into the lecture process. Be aware of your voice and how you speak. Be careful not to talk too much. Be careful not to talk too quickly. Make sure that you can be heard and you can be understood. Be sure to avoid a monotone, one level type of speaking. And remember that being enthusiastic is contagious in the classroom. Don't forget that you want to monitor and have students interact with you so you can gauge how they're learning the content. Just because students hear something doesn't mean that they really have understood it. Some other guidelines include consider using an advanced organizer so that learners can have something to peg what you're saying against. Make sure you have a clear beginning, end, and logical order of what you're saying. Reinforce with visuals. Have students participate more. Have a clear ending followed by some type of activity. Make sure you keep your talk short and think about your pacing. Keep it a little bit quicker rather than going too slowly. Remember that the type of lecture that is performed and conducted at the college and university level is appropriate for this level, but is normally not appropriate for adolescents. Think about recapturing student attention every so many minutes. Think about how students look at commercials, whether it's on TV or YouTube or other sites, about 10 to 15-minute blocks, and then get a commercial in there. Think about varying your strategies and your activities often. If you're using teacher talks and lecture, then also do a student-centered activity. Some researchers tell us change the learning activities, change your method of teaching about every 10 to 15 minutes. Change it up. In a 60-minute period, think about maybe using 3 or 4 sequenced learning activities. Think about how you will prepare for the lecture. Are you going to use an outline? Are you going to write notes? But one thing for sure is do not read the lecture from a screen, because that will definitely lose the attention of the learners. Think about how you could guide students in note-taking. What's important for them? Is that something you can also include in your lectures? Don't just summarize a textbook. If you do that, you'll find that students won't read those assignments, but rather think about discussing it and augmenting and supplementing what is located in those reading assignments. Don't just stand stationary in the room. Think about moving about the room. Keep it interesting. Also, think about all your learners. Will everybody understand all the vocabulary? If not, think about explaining vocabulary as you travel on. Good teachers use examples and analogies and metaphors to bridge knowledge that students already have to knowledge that they don't have yet, that they have not yet acquired. Another thing that is really critical is in the classroom, make sure that you look at students. Look them in the eye. Now, certainly don't make it uncomfortable looking, but make sure that you look at everyone in the eye at least once every class. This helps develop rapport. It allows you to read the students to see how they're doing, both in terms of are they paying attention and are they comprehending everything, and this will also help you a lot with classroom management. A second activity in this topic is to work to improve our lecture. All teachers will use lecture, so how can we improve that? If you're taking this class face-to-face, we may be doing this in person. If you're taking this class online, then watch Blackboard or watch for email instructions from the instructor as to how we will conduct this activity. Now let's consider two different ways to further enhance the effectiveness of lectures. The first is called presentational hooks. How are you going to increase student engagement in your lectures? The author Dave Burgess, he's author of Teach Like a Pirate, a really good book, suggests using presentational hooks, kind of like a fisherman who's going to hook and draw in a fish into the boat. He says this will help you draw students into this lesson and better engage them. The hooks make teaching more interesting and more fun, and definitely more engaging. One way Burgess suggests to hook students into the lecture and the lesson is through a kinesthetic hook. In other words, incorporate movement in some way into the lesson. Can you throw something, roll something? Can you have students catch something? Maybe you could turn the entire room into a giant opinion meter and have students move around based on different, or stand up and sit down based on different statements. Have students get up and do something like act out something. Maybe create a simulation in which students reenact part of the lesson. One example that Burgess talks about from his middle school teaching in history, he said that he was doing a lesson on resistance to slavery, and he talked about the person Henry Box Brown. And Henry Brown mailed himself to freedom in a box. So Burgess said, I'm going to get a box, and I'm going to make it a similar dimension, and I'm going to invite students to come up and see if they could fit into that box. And of course, that would be a good discussion into, what did Henry Brown do, and to make it more real for the students. Well, he said by the afternoon classes, students were bolting through the door saying, we can fit into that box. That was very effective, and that movement, that get up and try something, made a big difference in terms of how students got engaged in that lesson. A second way suggested by Burgess is by using people as props. Create a human graph or a human chart or a human map by having students stand in different places representing different locations on a map. Maybe you're teaching a process, and he says maybe assign students to be a specific step in the process. Then you can have the students order themselves in some way, or you can like move them around, prompt them to move in different locations. You could have students as props for whatever content, and then have the rest of the class, different members of the class, function as the movers of the props. Probably one of the most significant things you can do as a teacher is to answer the so what question. If a student says to you, all right, you want us to learn this particular bit of content, like, so what? Like, why should I do that? As a teacher, if you can show students why learning this particular content is important in the real world, or how students could apply this, or why this is so important in their lives, you will then have applied what Burgess calls the real world application hook. Another activity we'll engage in is examining how could you use a presentational hook to improve your lecture. Again, if you're taking this class in person, face-to-face, we may be doing this in person. If you're taking this class online, we may be engaging online to conduct this activity. Another way we can improve lecture is to use what Knight calls thinking prompts and use them as attention getters. In Knight's book, High Impact Instruction, he discusses using thinking prompts as a hook and a way to engage learners. Now, Knight describes and defines thinking prompts as any kind of device that provokes conversation or dialogue or deep thought. And it can be anything. And he gives examples: video clips, articles, cartoons, could be visual works of art, it could be an issue, a problem, a question, it could be some artifact that you bring in to show the students something to engage them instantly into and draw them into that content. Thinking prompts are beneficial in the classroom because, again, they promote dialogue and thinking. They help students make connections to things in the real world, and they provide context and background knowledge. And ultimately, they're engaging and they're hooking the students in. Knight talks about the types of thinking prompts that are effective. He says the really effective ones are in some way provocative. They're interesting, they're complex, they're relevant, they're positive, and they're also concise. Specifically, Knight describes that an effective thinking prompt being provocative means that people can't wait to talk about it, that it's something that really gets them engaged very, very quickly. When he talks about complex, he means that there may be several different ways to view that particular content. When he says personally relevant, it means that it's speaking right to individuals. Positive, you definitely want to choose something that's not going to have a negative impact, because that could kind of drag down the mood of the classroom. And concise, you certainly want it to be quick to view and then allow the rest of the time for the students to interact and talk about it. An example of employing a thinking prompt in history would be to use a comic strip or a cartoon or a meme about something that went on historically. In this particular comic strip, it evokes emotion as the students read it. A teacher of literature could show a video clip, or could show a poster or a picture or an artwork of some character from a literary story. A history teacher might be able to locate something like a Civil War bullet and allow students to actually touch it and to see these artifacts up close and personal. In history, if students are able to actually view and touch an arrowhead from Native Americans, that will really make that learning much more relevant to them. A literature teacher could show postcards or graphics or other types of pictures of either authors or literary figures or characters. Again, it will help the student to connect to these characters, these authors, or these stories, and make it more interesting and personally relevant to them. A history teacher could display a painting or other graphic of some battle that has taken place. For example, in this painting, there's a whole lot going on to which students can connect and also feel emotional content and connection. A math teacher could show a video such as one that I watched called Statistics, Math That Makes You Think. And in that video, there weren't even any words to it, but rather just visuals displaying different facts about like different populations and how it compares to the population in the United States of America. And it just made it so interesting and just drew you right in. For our last interactive activity, we will consider thinking prompts. What kind of thinking prompt could you use in your class to draw more attention and, so to speak, reel the student in to the presentation. Again, if you're taking this class face-to-face, we may be doing this in class. If you're online, we may be conducting these activities in an online format. As a quick review, in this video we considered ways to improve lecture. We talked about ways to use alternative methods of lecture in which students are more engaged and more interactive in the lecture process. We also talked about different guidelines and different thoughts about how a teacher could improve his or her lecture activities. We also talked about two other effective tools. One is presentational hooks that make teaching more interesting and meaningful and fun and engaging for learners. And also thinking prompts that really invoke conversation and promote dialogue and deeper thought, which again draws the student in and makes the learning more real. I hope you enjoyed watching this video.